And welcome to the urinary system. So for this, it's going to be about the kidneys and the bladder, etc., etc. So the kidney functions to regulate water volume and solute concentration. Solute concentration sounds pretty impressive, but really all it means is things like glucose levels, nutrients, things of that nature. So the thing that you want to make awfully sure is that blood volume, blood pressure going in and blood going in and out of the kidneys, you're not going to have a drop in the blood pressure, you're not going to have a drop in the blood volume, and you're not going to have a drop in blood glucose. So your kidneys are there to make sure that they're purifying and getting rid of all the toxins and adjusting your pH and things of that nature, but that you're not losing water, you're not losing glucose. That's what that first statement is getting at. Long-term acid-base balance. For your own edification, this is not going to be on the quiz, but the short-term acid-base balance is breathing. It's the lungs. It takes seconds for the lungs to adjust blood pH. On the other hand, you could have somebody with a COPD like emphysema, and they're going to have to rely a lot more on their kidneys. So that's what they mean by long-term acid-base balance. Often it's going to be chronic diseases, but that is not going to be on the quiz. But that is one of the jobs of the kidney, is to make sure that the pH of the blood is 7.4. And then this I do want you to know: removal of metabolic waste, removal of toxins, removal of drugs. So very often when you take pharmacology, you'll hear about renal clearance with drugs, because it sounds very counterintuitive. With drugs, they're considered foreign chemicals, and one of the jobs of the kidneys is to get rid of them. So very often a pharmacologist is going to need to know what the renal clearance is. In other words, how long is that drug going to be allowed to be in the blood and get to the cells of the body to remediate any number of conditions before the kidney pulls it out of the blood and you urinate it out of your body. So this last one is extremely important and kind of defines what the kidneys mainly do. All right. So to mainly do all of those things, you need to have a lot of parts. You need to regulate a lot of parts. So one of the first parts we're going to regulate or talk about are the hormones. So the kidney itself do have specialized cells that can produce two hormones. One is renin, and renin is going to be discussed a little bit more later on. It does help regulate blood pressure. And erythropoietin, which is a hormone released by the kidney that can help regulate red blood cell production. So if a person is anemic, if a person has hemorrhage, then the kidney can produce erythropoietin and make the stem cells produce and replace those red blood cells that have been lost. Another big thing is vitamin D. So vitamin D in food is in an inactive state, and the kidneys actually have specialized cells that can activate it, which is absolutely necessary for the absorption of calcium from food. So that is something I'd like to cover. The vitamin D calcium link is not going to be on the quiz. Renin and erythropoietin could be, because they're very important hormones. One is absolutely important for blood pressure, blood volume, and the other one is absolutely important for making sure that you have enough red blood cells in circulation to meet the oxygen demands of the body. All right. So the urinary system organs. You got two kidneys. They're in your lower back. You got two ureters that take the urine and pass it from the kidney into the urinary bladder. You got one of those. And from the urinary bladder to the outside, when you urinate, is called the urethra. And I think we should have a pretty picture next. There we go, pretty picture. So if you could imagine this is the back. They've removed, obviously, the small and large intestine. And now what you have is you have the renal arteries go in to both of the kidneys. That is where you're going to then process and adjust blood volume, blood pressure, pH, get rid of the toxins, blah, blah, blah. And then what comes out the renal veins is purified blood. Each kidney has its own renal artery, renal vein. Each kidney also has on top of it an adrenal gland, and one of the hormones that we'll talk about, aldosterone, actually comes from the adrenals. Once you've made the urine, it passes out of the kidney into the ureter, and these tubes move the urine by peristalsis and push it into the bladder. And then, this is a female, once the bladder is full and you want to urinate or micturate, urination is fine, but and then it passes out via the urethra, which is very tiny, so that's only about 3 centimeters in a female. And in a male, it's going to thread through the penis, so it's much longer in men than women. All right, so that's the overview of the urinary system. And here is the overview of a cross-section of a kidney. So I am just going to talk very briefly about this. You have an outer cortex, and this cortex wraps around, and we're going to find out that part of the nephron is in that outer cortex. The inner medulla is complicated. It consists of these pyramids, they're called, and the pyramids contain the lower half of the nephron, and this is where the urine is going to start to collect and is going to be pushed out into a series of tubes called minor and major calyxes, and then it's going to pool into this part right here, which is called the pelvis, and then that pulled urine will go and be pulled into the ureter, and peristalsis will then move that into the bladder. Renal columns hold up the pyramids. I think that's really about it as far as the functional anatomy of the kidney. So you have your capsule for protection, you have the cortex. When it says superficial region, I think the important thing is to realize that part of the nephron is there. The renal medulla is where you have your pyramids and your columns, and the lower part of the nephron, which we will talk about soon. All right, so the nephron is the smallest functional unit of the kidney. They're microscopic. You've got 1 million in each kidney. And you're going to have a blood supply that's unique, and you're going to have a tube supply that's unique. So let's talk about the blood supply, because the blood is what is going to pass through and be purified, etc. So to do that and to regulate it properly, you end up creating something very different. Every other body, organ system ends up having, an artery, capillary, venular, and you push it back to the heart and the whole thing starts again. But at the kidneys, nephron, you've got 2 arterioles and 2 capillary beds. And we'll talk briefly about why that is, but right now I just want you to know the names. The first capillary bed is called the glomerulus. And then the second capillary bed is the peritubular capillary. Show you a picture in a second. The 2 arterioles are the afferent with an A that go into the glomerulus, and an efferent arteriole with an E that comes out of the glomerulus. And then once you've got your blood purified, then the blood enters the renal venule. Okay, the tube structure of the nephron. Bowman's capsule is the first part. And then there's the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. And here's a picture. I don't need you to know this part. I'm not going to get into the different cell types, except to tell you that that's one of the reasons why the nephrons are irreplaceable. If you have damage to the nephron for whatever reason, and you lose a certain percentage of renal function, that's permanent. There's just absolutely no way that we have the technology to clone these. We don't have and the body doesn't have the technology to be able to replace them. So once you've destroyed any part of that nephron, that is a permanent loss of renal function. So having said that, this actually is a better picture as far as the tube structure goes. I'll just very briefly mention that you've got your afferent arteriole, your glomerulus, your efferent arteriole. What you're not seeing right here are the peritubular capillaries that surround the tube structure, and then the renal venule. The tube structure, you've got Bowman's capsule, named after a guy named Bowman who discovered it, and that's where that first capillary bed coils into this cup-like structure. The glomerulus is the first capillary bed. Then the filtrate that you're going to process is going to now move into the proximal convoluted tubules. Proximal because it's near the Bowman's capsule, convoluted because it's convoluted. Now, we're in the cortex. Now let's dip into the medulla, and this is your loop of Henle, also called the loop of Henle. Just say it with authority one way or the other. And we'll talk about what that does in a bit. And then you come up to the distal convoluted tubule because it's far away from Bowman's capsule. And then that dumps the urine into the collecting duct, which then comes down into the medulla, and eventually the urine will pool in the pelvis and leave. So, classes of nephrons. One of the job of the nephrons is not only to get rid of waste products, but it's also to make awfully sure that the volume and the pressure of blood, meaning the fluid portion, is not going to be lost as you filter out the impurities. So there are actually two types of nephrons. The majority are cortical nephrons because they are mainly in the cortex. This name from hell, juxtamedullary nephrons. You only have about 15% of them, but they dip deep down into the medulla, and they are really responsible for creating conditions that will maximize the flow of water from the kidneys back to the blood. So you don't lose that volume, you don't lose that pressure. So I do want you to know, why do we have 15% of juxtamedullary nephrons? Well, it's the fact that they go deep into the medulla and that they are able to concentrate the urine by returning most of the water from the urine back to the blood. Okay, so I don't need you to know all of the labeling here. This is just a visual. These are the cortical nephrons. Now notice that your loop of Henle and your collecting duct are in the medulla for your cortical ones, but look at the juxtamedullary ones. Amazing! It goes way, way deep down, and we'll find that that is able to create conditions which will maximize water flowing from the urine back to the blood. Okay, so do not memorize this, but this is absolutely amazing. Every day you process 180 liters of blood through the kidneys to purify, etc. But you only urinate out every day about 1.5 liters. So we'll talk about how that can happen. Really good thing. And we'll also talk about how do you figure out how to get rid of the waste products and return things like glucose back to the blood. So urine formation and adjustment of blood composition have 3 parts to it, and we'll take them one at a time. Glomerular filtration is the first, tubular reabsorption is the second, and tubular secretion is the third. So let's talk about these 3. You have your afferent arteriole. becoming the first capillary bed, the glomerulus, right here. And it nestles into that Bowman's capsule. Now what's going to happen is you're going to have a higher blood pressure in the arterial than in Bowman's capsule, so that water can move, plasma can move from high to low pressure. So you're not going to take all of the plasma, probably about half of it, and half of that plasma will then percolate into Bowman's capsule at the level of the glomerulus. Then what you're not going to be processing will then flow into the efferent arteriole, which will eventually become the peritubular capillary. Remember that the only place that you can exchange respiratory gases, etc., is at the capillary level. So that's one of the reasons why you have two capillaries. We'll do filtration here at the glomerulus, but we'll do reabsorption and secretion here at the peritubular capillaries. It makes for a more efficient kidney. And it has to do with the fact that in evolution, you could get solutions that allow a generation to have their children that will then grow and mature into adults that can carry on the next generation. I say this because the kidney is complicated. Kidney, if it was designed differently, would not be that complicated, but you're stuck with the design. So if it seems like the kidney is the worst organ system in the body, that's one of the reasons why it does things in a complicated manner. And it could have gone in a different direction. It didn't. And it's useful, but it's difficult for students to learn because it just is remarkably complicated. So here goes. The fluid that you push into the Bowman's capsule is not going to be, or there's no discernment, I'll put it that way. You are going to pass in to that Bowman's capsule anything that's dissolved in the plasma. That could be your electrolytes, glucose, waste products like urea, creatinine. And the thing is that since there's no discernment that you're pushing or filtering into Bowman's capsule, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's fantastic, but then you're going to have a way of reclaiming the good, reclaiming the glucose, reclaiming the electrolytes. So everything, good, bad, and ugly, waste products and products that you need for survival, are going to get pushed into Bowman's capsule. You call that a filtrate because it's not yet urine, it's just a filter. So your filtrate, your plasma that got filtered in, is now going to travel down your proximal convoluted tubule. So let's kind of stop it right here. The second process is tubular reabsorption, where you're going to take certain molecules like glucose, the good, and you're going to transport them back to the blood. So reabsorption is tube to blood. And there are very specific transport mechanisms for those chemicals that the body wants back. So the body wants nutrients back, it wants glucose back, it wants electrolytes back. And so it has transport mechanisms for that. So what is held behind in the filtrate that will become the urine are the waste products. And that means that what you urinate out of your body is waste products by default. You don't obviously have, thank God, transport mechanisms for waste products. So the waste products now are trapped in the kidney tube, and the good, what the body wants to reclaim, now has been reabsorbed back. Secretion is the movement of a chemical from the blood into the kidney tube. When you take pharmacology, you'll find that there are a number of drugs that are going to be secreted. And that's going to be part of their, going to be part of the way that they are eliminated by the body. That's going to be part of their renal clearance. I'm not going to get into that. I am just going to say that if you want to adjust the pH of the blood so it's in that 7 neutral range, secretion is where it happens. So I do want you to know that secretion is going to be on the quiz about acid-base balance, where you're going to move things from the blood into the kidney tube to adjust pH. Reabsorption is going to be of the good that the body wants back, and filtration is going to be everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that could be done a whole lot easier, could be less confusing, but this is what we're stuck with. By the time you've done filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, you can now call this urine. So glomerular filtration rate is huge. When you take patho, when you take pharm, you're going to have this term glomerular filtration rate tossed around a lot. When you have people who are in renal failure, they're going to be testing their glomerular filtration rate a lot. Glomerular filtration rate is all about what's going on with that first capillary, the glomerulus, and what's going on between it and the Bowman's capsule. So, as the name implies, it's the rate at which the glomerulus, that capillary bed, is filtering plasma into Bowman's capsule. So here we go. Volume of filtrate, which will become urine, formed per minute by both kidneys. Don't memorize 100 to 125 mils per minute, but I do want you to know that the glomerular filtration rate is the volume of filtrate formed per minute by the kidneys. Now, you will want to be able to regulate that. There'll be times when, let's say, if you have a dip in blood pressure, or you have hypertension, or you have other types of chronic diseases like diabetes, that the glomerular filtration rate will be altered, and you want to regulate that and try to get it back to homeostasis. So there are 3 ways that you can adjust or regulate glomerular filtration rate. You can contract the afferent arterioles. They are the source of the plasma. If you vasoconstrict it, you can lower the glomerular filtration rate. If you vasodilate it, you can increase the glomerular filtration rate. So that, especially the afferent arteriole, whether it's vasoconstricted or vasodilated, that's one way to manage it. Local controls, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the hormones that can control this. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail on the intrinsic and extrinsic controls of the glomerular filtration rate. That's something that you learned in AAP 1. It's very complicated. I'm going to kind of gloss over it. And sympathetic autonomic nervous system. We're going to find out that the sympathetic nerves can feed to the smooth muscle of the arterioles, and they can adjust their dilation or constriction to help regulate the glomerular filtration rate. I just want you to know those 3 things. You can contract the afferent arterioles, you have some local controls, and you have some input with the autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetic, but obviously you want to control the kidney function with the brain, you want to control it with vasoconstriction or vasodilation, and you also want to have local controls. An angiotensin aldosterone mechanism from hell. But it is absolutely positively excellent, wonderful mechanism for making awfully sure that your blood pressure and blood volume remain viable and correct and all this other stuff. So if you have a drop in blood pressure, if you have a drop in blood volume, the kidney itself is going to sense it, and the kidney is going to begin to release a hormone, renin. Some people call it renin, and the renin enters the blood, and it's going to start a cascade. And the result of that cascade is to produce a very potent chemical called angiotensin II. Angiotensin II is a remarkable molecule in that it can systemically constrict blood vessels and bring that blood pressure back up. And it also will constrict the afferent arteriole so that you're not losing volume through urine. So it's going to decrease the glomerular filtration rate and therefore decrease urine output. In addition to doing that, because of the drop in blood volume, which could lead you into shock and be devastating to the body, it is also not only going to do angiotensin II, but it's also going to result in the release of aldosterone. And aldosterone is a hormone that is released by the adrenal glands. And what that will do is it will work on the kidney tubules to reabsorb a lot of the salt, the sodium chloride. And as the salt is going from the kidney tube back to the blood, water will be drawn with it. So between the angiotensin II vasoconstricting everything, so you're preserving that water in the body when then maybe a person has a hemorrhage or other ways of having the blood pressure suddenly drop, you can also then have the aldosterone work on the electrolytes and reabsorb the main electrolyte of the body, which is sodium chloride, as far as the main electrolyte in the blood, and then that will drag another volume of water back. So between those two, it's very protective of the body. So you can have these minor crises or even major crises, and the kidney can help mediate its own survival and the survival of the body itself. Okay. Now, it's not going to be the only way to maintain a proper water balance, blood pressure, blood volume balance. You always have to have backups, and you always have to have different hormones work together depending on the crisis. So there is another hormone called antidiuretic hormone right here, antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. And what ADH does is it is going to work on the level of the medulla. Now the medulla, and we really haven't talked too much about it, and I'm going to try to simplify it, but the medulla and the lobe of Henle and the collecting duct and antidiuretic hormone, what they're really all about is to move a vast amount of water as it's going down the collecting duct out of the urine, which at this stage is very dilute, and back into the blood. So by the time you get down to the bottom of that collecting duct, you have concentrated the urine so much that it's ready to pull in the pelvis and go out the ureter to the bladder to later be urinated out of the body. So antidiuretic, diuresis means to urinate. So antidiuretic means to stop urination. So the antidiuretic hormone, it's made by the posterior pituitary, and it acts on that medulla part of the kidney. And it acts specifically on the collecting cells and makes them incredibly permeable to water. So water gets wicked out of the collecting duct and back into the blood. Now, this is perhaps medically more accurate, but I just want to have you in your mind say, okay, ADH is going to mediate the movement of vast amounts of water out of the collecting duct, out of the urine, back into the blood. So between ADH and angiotensin II and aldosterone, you're going to make sure that if there is a pathological dip in blood pressure, blood volume, you can have all of these work together to make sure that the blood volume and pressure that goes in equals that goes out, and that your electrolytes, etc., are also going to be balanced, and you won't lose electrolytes and you won't lose water to urine. So the urine output will be very small, very concentrated urine, but until that individual can get rehydrated, that's the way to save the person's life. So it says the antidiuretic hormone will increase water reabsorption from the cells of the collecting duct to the salty interstitial fluid and then back to the hypertonic blood. For the quiz, what I want you to know is that ADH will move water from the collecting duct back to the blood, and that would decrease urine output and decrease the loss of water under the conditions of low blood volume, low blood pressure. So what is urine actually made up of besides water? Um, it's going to be all of the waste products that you want to urinate out of your body. These are the poisons. These are the breakdown products of metabolism that can be very harmful because it can alter pH, it can alter osmolarity, and you don't want to be poisoned. So you want to take those waste products that are quite harmful and to move them into the urine that you're going to move out of your body. So the ones that are the most commonly targeted for tests to see how good you're clearing all of this is urea, uric acid, and creatinine. Now, nitrogenous waste, what does that actually mean? It means the breakdown of protein. So we all have to have protein, and when we take in protein and break it down so that we can use it to help our muscles move our body, they will metabolically be able to do that, but the waste products that they generate can be quite harmful. So proteins have nitrogen in them, and carbohydrates don't. So the urea, the uric acid, and creatinine, you call them nitrogenous waste to indicate that they are protein breakdown products, waste products that need to be removed. So I just want you to know urea, uric acid, and creatinine, and that's it for that slide. So now that we have done that, we have taken plasma, we have cleared it of toxic waste products, we have adjusted the pH, we've adjusted electrolytes, we've adjusted water. I think we're about ready to rock and roll. So the urine is now containing the waste products and anything else that is needed to get a good blood volume, blood pressure, electrolytes, pH in the blood to make the body happy. All the other waste products, etc., are going to pass in the urine, down the ureter to a very muscular sac called the bladder, and then out the urethra. Now, the thing about the bladder is it's basically a sac of smooth muscle, or a bag of smooth muscle. It's called the detrusor muscle, and it can obviously contract and expand. You have stretch receptors in there, so that can fire back to the central nervous system to aid in voiding or emptying the bladder, which is the last piece that we have to cover. This is just going to be functional anatomy. Here are your two ureters that are peristaltically moving the urine into the bladder. You've got stretch receptors that can feed that information to the brain. You've got smooth muscle, you've got skeletal muscle. So you have some control over when you can or want to urinate. Here is your urethra, and then your external opening or orifice. So yeah, this is the female. If it was the male, it would be much longer because it would go through the penis. All right, I think this is the last slide. Micturition, very medical term for urination or peeing, and you have three things that are going to occur. So you're going to fill the bladder up with urine, and now the stretch receptors say, it's time to urinate. So the three things that are going to happen all at once is you're going to have the contraction of this smooth muscle called the detrusor muscle by the autonomic nervous system in the brain. So that's going to contract and push that urine into the urethra. Right now the urethra closed, so let's open it up. You're going to have the opening of the external urethral sphincter by Now, the somatic nervous system means it's under conscious control. So you can consciously decide that this is the time you want to urinate. That's the somatic nervous system. That's the conscious part. Now, the unconscious part is going to be the internal urethral sphincter, that's the autonomic nervous system. You need that because there has to be an override. You might not feel like urinating, but the bladder is not going to burst. What's going to happen is if you keep ignoring those signals, the autonomic nervous system will override everybody and get that detrusor muscle to contract and open up the urethra, and you're going to urinate whether you like it or not. Lovely, isn't that? Great cocktail conversation. But once you contract the bladder and open up both of the autonomic and conscious sphincters of the ureter, then the urine can void out of the bladder and you are micturating, you're urinating, and therefore removing any toxic waste products of metabolism from the body. And I think that's it. Yes. So that is the end of the excretory system, renal, and I will see you next for the last chapter, which is on reproduction. Take care.